Carbide named no names, but everyone in Bhopal knows who the company points the finger at. Mohan Lal Verma was in dispute with the management over a transfer. He was the obvious suspect. No one believes his guilt. He'd hardly still be living in Bhopal if they did.
मुझे कभी भी ऐसा नहीं लगा कि या कभी भी ऐसा डर महसूस नहीं किया मैंने क्योंकि ऐसा ये तो सिर्फ एक बनावटी है एमआईसी प्लांट के अंदर काम करने वाला आदमी आराम से जानता उसकी प्रॉपर्टी से जानता था तो उसमें पानी मिलाने पर कितनी खतरनाक रिएक्शन हो सकती है उसके बारे में उसको बहुत अच्छे से मालूम है तो ये तो कहीं से प्रश्न ही नहीं उठता कि उसके अंदर कोई आदमी जो है जानबूझ के पानी डालेगा
In Carbide's corporate creed, mention of Bhopal is religiously followed by a reference to sabotage. Their American workers believe it no more than they do in Bhopal.
It seemed like the company took a way out by using sabotage. I kind of feel the workers felt at the time. It's like a friend getting in trouble, a celebrity you may be a fan of, that when they get in trouble, you almost hope there's an excuse. And when you hear the excuse, you want to believe it, but you're not really sure, and you kind of cringe.
It took the heat off of them. Throw the blame on a single individual instead of a big corporation. It jettisoned a lot of their problems. And most people not having worked in an industrial environment know how a factory or process works would likely believe it.
The campaign to convince American opinion that Bhopal was a foreign problem paid off. Now they'd successfully exported guilt for the tragedy abroad, Carbide argued that an American court was no place to have the matter tried. They won.
It turned out to be probably the best thing that could have happened to Carbide because under the Indian system, the case bogged down for several years, and ultimately Carbide was able to achieve a recommended settlement well within the boundaries of what people expected or had hoped for.
History's biggest liability case came to the Bhopal District Court. American lawyers dropped out. There was no percentage in Indian damages. The Indian government appointed itself to represent the victims' interests, but many preferred to trust men like Vibhuti Jha, a local lawyer and himself a victim of the gas. Vibhuti Jha has seen his clients grow poorer, sicker and more desperate.
They are bitter. They can only be bitter. They have great anguish, but they don't know what to do. Imagine if such a thing happened in any other country, which is a prosperous country. People have sufficient resources. Each one of them could have filed an individual suit, an individual claim, and could have claimed something, could have got proper compensation. Unfortunately, in a country like India, the status of the people is so low that they can't afford to fight giant multinationals like Union Carbide.
The gas has made Bhopal's poor poorer still. For manual workers, breathlessness makes it impossible to earn what was always a survival wage. Danu Pawar's husband drove a rickshaw. He needed good lungs to support his wife and two small children.
हर चीज़ की परेशानी रहती थी गोली दवाई लाने की भी खाने की भी सभी चीज़ की परेशानी थी उस समय पे करती थी मैं जाना आना पैदल रोज का जाना फिर आना वहाँ से फिर खाना बनाना घर में कभी कभी जैसे फिर ज़्यादा हालत मेरी हो गई थी ना तो फिर नहीं आती थी फिर वहीं सो जाती थी
Danu's husband Kailash was left for dead the night of the gas. He woke up dumped on a cart of corpses.
दिन ज़्यादा खराब होती गई सांस फूलना खूब खांसी चलना लेट नहीं पाते थे बैठे रहते थे 24 घंटे बैठ के ही मतलब खाना भी नहीं खाते थे बैठे रहते थे गोली दवाई खाएं इंजेक्शन लगता था फिर थोड़ा आराम मिल जाए फिर वैसी हालत हो जाने लगती थी
5 years brought no cure and no prospect of compensation reaching him. Kailash's father saw his son's spirit slowly fail.
अब हम शाम को 10 साढ़े 10 बजे पहुंचे बाबू मुर्गी पुड़िया लेके तो वहाँ देखे थे दरवाजे के पास ये कम मर लिटाए हुए पड़ा हुआ, पुलिस भी खड़ी, बहुत सारे आदमी पड़े, तो हमने नहीं देखा कि कौन है क्या नहीं है। हमने कहा होगी कोई मरीज मरीज वगैरह होगा। हमने दरवाज़ा खोल के अंदर जाने लगे, तो उसने कहीं ने बताया होगा दादा का लड़के का पिताजी जा रहे हैं। मेरे दादा कहाँ जा रहे हो आप? नहीं साहब अपने बच्चे के पास जा रहे हैं। कहाँ जा रहे हैं? कहे कहाँ के बच्चे के पास? अरे हमने हमारे बच्चे के पास जा रहे हैं, कैलाश के पास। कहना कैलाश तो जी बड़ा।
In a hospital corridor, Kailash had soaked himself in kerosene and burnt himself to death. At the local cinema, the old man has gone back to work. He looks after the bikes. Another gas victim, he must pay off the money his son borrowed for medicine. Danu takes in sewing for a state-run clothing firm.
ये ना कि बस वो तो जान चली गई, मेरी तो जिंदगी बर्बाद हो गई। वो तो जाने वाले चले गए, लेकिन मेरी मतलब कितनी परेशानी हो गई कि बच्चों को रखना, ससुर को भी रखना, पूरा मतलब मेरे सहारे हुआ है। मेरे से दुख बर्दाश्त नहीं होता है जरा सा भी।
The law's delay can be especially cruel to plaintiffs already desperate for relief. But for Carbide, the leisurely progress of the case at the Supreme Court in Delhi was to their benefit. They resisted an order to pay interim compensation. It would have given the victims a financial breathing space, but damaged Carbide's advantage. The victims' lawyers were exasperated by Carbide's apparent determination to fight matters to a standstill.
Union Carbide were united, they were cohesive, they were extremely competent. They clearly had a particular goal in view, and their whole goal was to avoid liability, was to avoid payment of compensation. Clearly, they were determined to make this into a triable, into a vexed legal issue, into which as much of battle would have to go in as possible. Their whole attempt was to wear down the Union of India, was to wear down the plaintiff, and to see that the case dragged on as much as possible so that the resources which the government of India could command as a plaintiff, the evidence in the matter, all would possibly wear out, and by sheer passage of time they would have an advantage.
Others felt that the Indian government team lacked Carbide's skill and determination.
Unfortunately, what has happened is that right from the beginning, it appears that the Indian government is scared of Carbide. And there has never been a real fight, so to say. It has been a fight between unequals. Carbide dictating its terms, government accepting it. That has been the fight.
The choice was a fight of up to 10 years for a judgment that set a precedent for corporate responsibility or a quick fix for cash. Out of the blue, Carbide offered a deal, India accepted it, and the court agreed it. The terms were that Carbide should pay $470 million in full and final settlement. It was a bargain for Carbide.
The main reason which weighed with the court in sanctioning the settlement was, when will the victims see the color of the money? The court had no other motive or intention but the thought that what will happen to the plight of the victims. The case will go on for years and years, and frankly it was a case of intellectual and mental fatigue.
Wall Street, where they know a good deal when they see one, was exhilarated.
Clearly, from the point of view of investors, this was considered to be a sum that Carbide could afford to pay. And there was a sigh of relief, in effect, that this was all Carbide was going to pay.
On the stock exchange, Carbide shares jumped $3, adding $270 million to their value. That and their insurance cover came to what they'd finally agreed to pay. But Carbide's greatest victory was the clause in the settlement under which the government of India undertook to defend the company against any future civil action and to quash all criminal charges against it and its employees.
But mind you, it's not so much that we are after anyone's blood. We don't want any Warren Anderson or anyone to be in Indian jails. We don't want another book by an American about how bad the Indian jails are. Main thing was we wanted the investigation to continue, which would have given a very good clue as to what are their standards. Do they have different standards for people in their own country, where life, I suppose, is not so cheap? Or do they have different standards in India, where they find people in slums and begging when you are stopped at traffic lights? That's important. That would have shown the attitude of the multinationals, and that, to my mind, there was something which they were very apprehensive about.
It's a missed opportunity, not only for the people of India, but people of the whole third world. They were expecting that the Supreme Court of India would lay down certain laws, and the multinationals could rarely have been told that life in the world, the human life, is not so cheap, and it has not to be dealt with so casually.
The case provided then no blueprint governing the behavior of big companies in poor countries, and an Indian court had allowed that opportunity to pass.
There was one country in the third world that could deal with it, knew how to deal with it. It was India. And so it's even more unfortunate, because it's the lesson that's told to any country that might suffer this, particularly in the third world, is if India couldn't deal with it, with all the skill they have, with the developed legal system they have, then no country can handle